I went out for bananas and a sponge and came home with a shoebox full of other people's summers. The yard sale 2 blocks over had a sign that said everything $1, stories free, and I believed it because the woman in the denim jacket said it like a blessing. Inside the box, Polaroids with tea-stained borders and colors that leaned a little left, birthday candles leaning into laughter, a graduation cap in midair, a kid in a tiger suit with whiskers smudged by cake. On the back of some, captions in patient cursive, Mayfair Parade 97, Lorraine's Peonies, Easter hats. On one, a man with eyebrows like hedges stood grinning with a tin lunch pail. Someone had written Hamp. The name tugged on a string I hadn't realized ran through the whole town. Mr. Hampton, our old mailman, kept showing up in the stories I'd heard at bakeries and on porches, the kind of man whose wave lasted longer than the corner. I didn't plan a project. I planned to hang a few on my wall, because stranger's joy is a good lamp when your room is dim. But the second idea arrived like rain on a tin roof, too steady to ignore. Return them. Not to the niece overseas, but to the faces, if they were still here, or to whoever loved them now. I made coffee. I made a list. First task, a wedding picture labeled Dan plus Miriam, August 12, '84, behind VFW. The VFW still stands, always mid-argument with the weather. It felt like a reasonable first knock, a way to learn the town's doorbell voice. I tucked the photo into a book like it might get shy, and I walked into an afternoon that had decided to be helpful. Behind the VFW, porches sit like elbows on a table. I showed the photo at 3 wrong addresses before a 4th wrong one gave me the right map. The woman at the 4th door wore flour on her apron like confetti and knew every version of everybody. "That's Miriam," she said, like I just found a card under a couch cushion. "2 over on Linden. Dan was a good dancer, God rest him, and a terrible backup singer. She'll want that picture." On Linden, the door opened on the smell of cinnamon and the color of a cardigan that matched the exact shade of old kitchen tile. Miriam took the photo with a careful grip like it could spook. "We thought these were gone," she whispered, and the room changed temperature. There was cake on the plate between us and decades on her tongue. She told me the trellis was scrap wood and stubbornness, that Dan spun her until earrings threatened to resign, that Mr. Hampton always slid birthday cards through the slot if he saw icing on the counter. I left with an empty mug, a full chest, and a request I hadn't asked for: keep going. At the laundromat corkboard I pinned an index card, Found Memories Project, returning photos. If you recognize a face, text. I took a picture of my own card like proof I'd done something that could be seen. When the dryer door thumped shut somewhere behind me, it sounded like a small promise closing with a click. The first text arrived before breakfast. "Is that Little League shot at Turner Field? My brother's grin is illegal." Then a florist wrote to claim the peonies. A nervous teen asked if I had prom 94 with Silver Doc Martens. I did. She cried, then laughed because the bangs. The town began to answer itself through my phone in voice notes and directions that started with landmarks instead of numbers. Left at the mural with the purple fish, second house after the mailbox shaped like a trout. Between deliveries I learned Mr. Hampton's route by osmosis. People handed me bowls of stories as if we were all seated at a long table passing what we had. He rescued a cat from the gazebo roof, held mail when families traveled, tucked library flyers into bills the week the summer reading program launched. Returning photos made me the kind of person who knocks and waits with their hands quiet. It made me better at my day job too, copywriting with fewer adjectives and more honesty. Mornings I wrote. Afternoons I walked with a tote bag full of faces and a pencil for taking notes no one would ever see. There were missteps. A porch gusted a picture into a hedge. I crawled in like a raccoon and came out with leaves in my hair and an apology and a muffin. I gave the right baby to the wrong house and got directions, hugs, and a recipe for a soup that fixes February. Each mistake felt like proof the project was alive enough to stub toes. On Saturday, the community center lent me 2 folding tables and the faith that people show up if you give them a good reason. We spread the Polaroids on craft paper and wrote big, friendly signs, "Take yours home." Help name the unknowns. A kid named Milo started a sheet titled "Who is this?" And a second sheet appeared under it in a different hand. "Who we think this is." Guesses stacked into answers until the room learned new names for old faces. "That's the old fireworks pier." "That's Coach Meredith before sunscreen existed." "That's Jaspreet's dad. Look at the nose." Frank, who tunes radios like they're birds, brought a vintage lamp that made every photo glow like a remembered kitchen. June taped the project flyer to pastry bags so Cinnamon Sugar might deliver the news. I kept one picture on a small, separate easel, Hamp standing by a wall of mail slots, his grin the exact shape of a welcome mat. The caption on the back was only an address. "People touch the edge without quite touching him, the way you do in museums when the guide isn't looking." A woman in a postal cardigan traced the air near it and said, "He used to hum the same tune all winter. We called it Hamp's weather report." You could feel the town lean in around that easel. It made a gentle question in the room: where does Hamp's picture belong? The post office smelled like paper and purpose. I brought the Hamp photo at lunch, and the clerks unwrapped their sandwiches and their stories. "Leonard Hampton," one said, like a stage name spoken backstage. "He left not because he had to but because it was time." The wall behind the counter had a pinboard with retirement party snapshots, but this Polaroid was older, the whites whiter, the blue of his shirt almost a sky. "His niece cleared the house," another clerk added. "We didn't know where his keepsakes went." I said yard sale, library fund, denim jacket. Heads nodded. Someone called the niece on a number they'd saved for forwarding mail. The niece lived 2 continents away and cried through a bad connection and said, "Please tell your town thank you for loving my uncle out loud." We decided easily that the photos should live where his route could still find him. The postmaster pointed to a sunny slice of wall near the P.O. boxes. "Right there," she said. I level. "So every key turn can tip its hat." She asked me to come back for the hanging. I left with a receipt for nothing and the feeling of being deputized by an invisible department that handles tenderness and tape. The denim jacket woman from the yard sale called the next morning. "I have another box," she said, and then, softer, "There's a ledger." In Mr. Hampton's attic, she'd found a notebook bound in the tired blue of old binders. Inside, his tidy columns recorded birthdays, dog names, who like their mail walked up to the porch when it snowed, who shouldn't be startled by a knock, who needed a check-in after Tuesdays. It wasn't surveillance. It was choreography, how you remember a route like a dance you do for other people. We didn't photocopy it. We read a few pages aloud at her kitchen table and let the ache move through us, then closed it and wrapped it in brown paper with a string for the niece, because some tenderness is not ours to archive. But we did copy the first page, a dedication in his handwriting that said, "Forgetting is a kind of weather. This is my umbrella." We framed those words between 2 panes of glass so the light could come through, and I knew where they should hang long before I knew how to ask. We made an evening of it. Borrowed light, a night of found memories. The community center yard got string lights and a speaker playing old jazz like the time of day where conversations refused to end. People brought duplicates to trade, stories to tape to the backs of unlabeled faces, and a generosity that didn't make speeches about itself. Iris, who shoots sunrises like they need a translator, offered to document the returns. She captured a series I can't stop thinking about: hand to hand, photo crossing distance, a smile arriving like the porch light turning on. We taped Mr. Hampton's dedication near the tables, and folks paused, read it, and put a hand over their chest without noticing they had. Halfway through the night, the prom queen in Docks found her date from that photo, now the drummer who teaches 4th grade and keeps sticks in his desk like pencils. They reenacted the exact tilt of their heads. A florist recognized her grandmother's peonies and cut extras for everyone, stuffing paper cups with blooms until the yard smelled like May. A woman I'd never met held a picture of a boy in a Cubs cap and said, "This is my brother," then laughed a laugh with 2 stories in it. We didn't fix grief. We gave it a chair and a plate and let it eat among us. The next morning we hung Hamp's picture where the postmaster had pointed, eye level with 100 small locked doors. The niece watched on a video call, pixelated and perfect. A line formed spontaneously. People who wanted to touch the wall near the frame and tell a single sentence. He taught my kid to whistle with grass, he carried my packages up the stairs when my knee went on strike, he told me the exact day the lilacs would open and he was right. We read the dedication out loud. Forgetting is a kind of weather, and I felt the town add an umbrella to its daily carry. The ledger, wrapped and labeled, went to the niece with a letter we wrote together at the center's big table. It said we had not read more than the first page, that we loved him the way you love a person who never asked for credit, that the town was full of soft echoes with his name in them. I mailed it like a sacred thing and walked home by a route I didn't usually take, just to see what small corners had borrowed the morning. There were mysteries that needed detective work. One photo showed the back half of a dog, a porch swing, and a hand with a ring shaped like a braid. No faces. On the far edge, a sliver of a street sign. I borrowed a magnifying glass from the library's reference desk and squinted until the 3 letters became enough, D-E-N, Linden. I walked the block studying railings like a weirdo until a woman called. "Can I help you find my husband or your mind?" I held up the photo. She gasped and yelled for someone named Walt. The dog in the picture, older now, whiter around the snout, bounded out like a reunion had been scheduled all along. We drank lemonade on the porch and laughed about how sometimes you can find your way home with less than a corner of a clue. I learned to read backgrounds for directions the way I read voices for weather. A kite string meant Milo Street. A mailbox shaped like a trout meant the house where the porch light is always on, where they keep extra batteries for hurricanes everyone hopes will keep missing us. Not every photo found a home. Some stayed in the maybe binder with penciled notes that read like poems. Girl with red scarf, summer of the short corn, the day the power returned. It felt right to keep a little open space. Not every door needs closing to be useful. Work folded around the project without sulking. I said no to one conference and yes to more walks. My manager started asking about the town like it was my second client. "How's the archive?" she'd say on Zoom, and I'd tell her about the woman who kept a collection of keyholes because she loved the shapes of thresholds, about the man who took a photo of his hands holding his father's watch and said, "Time, but also company." Writing for kitchen catalogs got different, not louder, just truer. "This cutting board is for the onion you will cry over and the apple you will share." When you spend afternoons returning proof of joy, you stop pretending usefulness is plain. Rowan at the center suggested a permanent corner, borrowed light wall, where anyone could pin a copy and write a caption. We added a small scanner donated by a tech who prefers fixing to talking. Frank set the radio on the counter to the old jazz station at 10 a.m. daily, and it turned the center into a room that refuses to hurry. On the wall, the kind sign from the beach cleanup found a friend. Next to it, Iris tacked a sunrise photo that looked like the color of remembering. Underneath, a marker on a string so no one had to borrow a pen to say out loud what the picture already knew. Miriam invited me for coffee one Tuesday and introduced me to a box I hadn't expected, duplicates. "Hamp used to shake his camera," she said, miming the old superstition. "And then he'd give me one and keep one, just in case somebody needed reminding later." We sorted through second copies of small holidays. Snow angels stuck to wool hats. A baby with frosting in both ears. A parade float shaped like a fish that had clearly never met a fish. "What will you do when you run out?" she asked, and I realized I didn't mind the question anymore. You don't run out of remembering, you just change the medium. When I left, she pressed a photo into my hand, her and Dan under the trellis, the ribbons looking like they believed in wind. "For your wall," she said. "So other people's joy can keep lighting your room." That night, I taped it above my desk and wrote for an hour without checking my phone once. The town was quiet outside my window, and the Polaroid wasn't. It kept saying, more softly than a whisper, "Keep going." On the last afternoon of the project's first season, we met at the center to box what remained, a dozen maybes, a handful of already claimed duplicates we'd scanned and labeled, and the empty shoebox that had started it all, its cardboard edges now polished by my hands. I wrote on its lid in marker, "For next time." We carried Hamp's words with us, the umbrella line, and hung a small plaque by the borrowed light wall that just said, in neat print, "Returning is a kind of love." We walked to the post office together, June, Frank, Dee, Iris, the denim jacket woman, a teenager with silver boots, Miriam in that cardigan the color of old tile. We checked our boxes like a game, even the ones who preferred email. The jazz station turned the minute to gold. On the way back, I took the long way, past the VFW and the porch with the braided ring hand, past the laundromat corkboard that still held my first card, weathered but readable. The wind flipped it, and back like a heartbeat. I didn't take it down. At home, I slid the empty shoebox onto the library's donation shelf with a note tucked inside, in case you find a story that wants a place to live. Then I made tea and sat beneath my wall of borrowed light, Miriam and Dan, the prom ducks, a kite that finally flew, and listened to the town's small weather, a dog's tags, a screen door, somebody laughing like tomorrow is reasonable. I hadn't gone looking for a mission that day. I needed bananas. But I answered one, and it answered back, and now there's a place in this town where you can pin a memory, and know it won't have to travel home alone. The project went quiet the way summer evenings do, softly, after a long, generous brightness. I told myself to rest it. Then a photo slid out from between two cookbooks I'd stacked on my counter, a river under a bridge, the light so thick it seemed to carry the water. On the back only, sunset north span. I recognized the bridge, the one behind the care home where the maple turns first in October. I walked over with the photo tucked against my palm like a note for a friend who naps lightly. The receptionist knew the tone of a visitor who isn't sure what they're asking for. "Let's try the lounge," she said, and led me to a room full of chairs that understood patience. A man with a cap that had belonged to two other men looked up. "That's mine," he said before I even showed him the picture. I sat. He told me his name, Gus, and the way the river talks when you're standing under the span and nobody else is early. "I proposed there," he said, then laughed at himself. "Twice. To the same woman. The first time I forgot the ring." He held the photo with hands that had been busy for 7 decades. "You can keep it here," I said, already hearing myself argue with my own rules. He handed it back and shook his head. "No, you keep it. Come by on Thursdays and tell me where the light is now." On my walk home, I took the path under the north span. The river did its low, persuasive song. I learned the way evening makes a map you can follow without thinking. Back at my table, I wrote on a sticky note and tucked it to the back of the photo, "Gus says the river approves." It felt like adding a chapter to a book that knows it won't end. At the center, Rowan handed me a flyer Dee had made in block letters and a chaotic border of doodled cameras, captioned "Clinic, write what your future self will forget." We set up a long table with pens that didn't protest and stacks of index cards. People arrived with phones full of new digital moments, and a few sheepish Polaroids that had wandered out of drawers. Iris stood by the window light and coached in her soft teacher voice. "Write where you stood. Write what it smelled like. Write the joke no one else will get. Write the name of the dog." Miriam came with duplicates and wrote the kind of captions that make your throat do that new ache. "The last time Dan wore that green shirt he said it made him look like an unripe tomato." Frank wrote simply, "Radio good today. Air tasted like peaches." A teenager who only signed their name with a star wrote, "We weren't in love but we were excellent at sharing fries." I wrote my first caption for a photo I'd avoided, the yard sale table the day I found the box. "Bananas forgotten. Shoebox full of other people's summers. Denim jacket. Beginning disguised as a bargain." The room hummed like jazz trying to remember an old melody. We pinned the cards beside the photos and watched the pictures learn to speak in fuller sentences. On my way out, Iris slipped a roll of washi tape into my pocket. "For courage," she said. "It makes everything look intentional." I used a strip that night to anchor Gus's river under my lamp. The bridge held. Not every thread pulled easy. A man came into the center with a stiff posture and a careful voice. "I saw my mother's face on your wall. he said, looking not at me but through the idea of me. She was private. I'm private. I don't want it there. He wasn't angry. He was guarding a room inside himself with the door barely cracked. I took the picture down while he watched, and I felt the tiny wrench of removing something that has been seen. Thank you, he said, and the two words weighed a lot. We made new guidelines that afternoon and wrote them on a small sign under the umbrella, quote, ask, copy, consent. We offered to scan and return originals the same day. We kept only what was clearly invited to stay. That night I thought about the line between remembering and exposure, about how easy it is to turn a story into a window and forget to ask who lives behind it. I texted the man a scan of his mother's photo anyway with a caption option. You choose the words or none, he replied, after a long hour, with a single sentence that taught me something about reverence. She made the best soup and hated cameras. I printed it and tucked it behind the borrowed light wall where we keep the captions no one else gets to read. The Polaroid on my doormat was of me, mid-errand, laughing, the shoebox in my arms. The exposure had a soft flare in one corner like a blessing that arrived slightly sideways. No note. Just the picture face up under my door like a cat bringing you a gift and refusing to explain the hunt. The next morning, the denim jacket woman at the market raised an eyebrow when I showed it to her. Not mine, she said. I didn't see anyone with a camera that day. But Hamp had one, you know. He took doubles because he believed in breakage. I carried the mystery to Iris, who handled it like a rare shell. This is SX70 film stock, she said, grinning at the part of herself that loves tiny specifics. Someone's keeping old magic alive. She pointed to the corner flare. That's a light leak from a hinge. Charming. Annoying. Human. We taped it by the borrowed light wall with a blank caption and wrote underneath in pencil, Someone is watching us, be kind. For a few days, people kept glancing toward the door like they might catch the camera blinking. The attention felt less like surveillance and more like a town remembering it looked good from certain angles. A week later, the postmaster called. Hamp's niece is here, she said, in the same tone you used to say a comet is passing close enough to count the ice. We stood in a semicircle while she touched the frame and smiled the complicated smile of someone whose grief has learned to sit without taking over every chair. Thank you for keeping my uncle busy, she said. He hated being retired. She pulled a wrapped package from her bag. He meant to mail this to the library. His old camera. It probably works, if the town still makes batteries. We laughed because the town makes more than that, and Frank held the box like a hymn. We took the camera to the center and laid it on the table. It was heavier than our phones and lighter than the way certain moments feel. Frank found proper batteries in a drawer that, in any other building, would have been a tribute to chaos. Here it was organized like a kind sentence. Iris loaded film like a ritual. Okay, she said. Point and press and wait. The first photograph we took was of the borrowed light wall, which seemed right. The square slid out, and we watched its ghost assemble itself into a room we knew by heart. I felt the kind of hush that belongs to birth and to certain Tuesday afternoons. Learning the camera was like learning a neighbor's accent, what to listen for and when to smile and nod. My first 3 shots were too bright and then too sad. Frank declared them artsy, and we put them in the binder labeled experiments, which made failure feel like science. The next one, at Miriam's table, landed. Her hands, the photo of the trellis between them, the plate with 2 crumbs refusing to participate in tidiness. She looked at the square and covered her mouth. That's what memory feels like, she said. We pinned a copy to the wall, and she took the original home to live among her mugs. Soon I started bringing the camera to returns. People who never liked being photographed liked holding a photograph of themselves doing something dignified, receiving the past, giving it back a place to sleep. We tried to be careful, to ask, to step outside if the light in the room wanted quiet. Iris taught me to tilt a chin and to wait for the breath between sentences. A portrait is an agreement, she said. Not a heist. One afternoon, I took a photo of Gus and his cap under the north span. The river did its cordial rush. He signed the white border with a trembling G and said, "I hope you'll forgive this if my hands get worse." I told him we would write his name for him, any time. He tucked the square in his breast pocket like a prayer and told me to stop looking at the water so long and look at the sky. It was doing its own work up there. Rowan announced a map night because maps make chaos feel courteous. We hauled out the big paper, the kind schools rolled down over chalkboards, and sketched our town like a child who loves it. Big trees, exaggerated bakery, the river generous with its wiggles. Then we threaded red string from the places in the photos to the places the photos had returned to, pin after pin until the paper looked stitched by someone with excellent intentions. People traced the lines with their fingers and told side stories. We moved 3 doors down after the flood. That porch swing broke and no one got mad. The mural on Fish Street used to be a grocery list. At the end, Rowan drew a circle around the whole map and wrote in the corner, very small, returning, in block letters. "It's the verb that keeps giving us an object," he said, and I rolled my eyes at him for being the kind of person who says that, and then helped him fold the paper like we were tucking in a child. We left the map up by the wall, and I watched people detour around it for the next week, pausing to locate themselves, an old reflex that has never stopped feeling necessary. Some projects end with a ribbon cut. Ours decided to land like snow, the world changing one quiet piece at a time until you notice everything is brighter. The shoebox on my shelf is empty again except for the note that says for next time, but the wall at the center is fuller, and so am I. On a Sunday evening, the light came through the high windows and did that honeyed thing to dusk that makes everyone forgive everything. I aimed Hamp's camera at the borrowed light wall and pressed, then waited while the square performed its familiar trick. When the picture was ready, I wrote my first true caption for something I had made that would stay. "The wall at golden hour. The room where return things practice being home." I taped it to the bottom corner, a small square in a chorus of small squares. June wandered in with a basket of roll ends and read my caption out loud. "You're getting good at this," she said, meaning both the camera and the returning and the choosing of verbs. I shrugged and felt warm. Outside, the river practiced being a river. Inside, the jazz station announced 10 o'clock like it was letting everyone in on a gentle secret. I loaded another pack of film, because the town had taught me to be ready, and because the door chimed, and someone walked in holding a photo with no caption, and I knew from how carefully they carried it that we were about to find out where it belonged. They carried it like a candle cupped against wind. A square of white with a house in late afternoon, sunlight peeling off clapboard, a tricycle tipped on its side like a comma. No caption. The man set it on the table and kept one finger near the corner as if to keep it from getting ideas. "It used to be on cedar," he said, voice careful. "Before the fire." He didn't look at the photo so much as into it, the way you search a window for what's behind the glass. We stood with him, our silence learning to be useful. Iris angled the lamp so the picture's porch glowed again. "We can help you put it somewhere," Rowan offered. "Or nowhere," I added, remembering the consent sign. The man shook his head. "Somewhere people will pass by and remember the house as a good neighbor." We walked to Cedar together, the 3 of us and a memory that didn't mind being walked. The lot was grass and thistles now, a rectangle of sky cut down to earth. He told us how a pot left too long learned to be dangerous, how the walls tried and failed to keep their stories. "Nobody got hurt," he said, like a litany that ends with daylight. We planted the photo's copy in the little borrowed light frame we carried to pop-up places, staked it by a rock, and tied a ribbon so winter would know to be gentle. Back at the center, we printed the picture again and wrote a caption he dictated slowly. "Cedar Street House. Pancake Saturdays. Porch sing-alongs. We were here." On the wall it looked less like loss and more like a door, and I felt the town nod. Iris pitched. "Then / now. A re-photo walk." We gathered with copies of the old Polaroids and our phones, pairs and trios fanning out to the same corners and stoops, aligning horizons like apologies and promises. Dee measured angles like a cartographer with a crush. June handed out crumbly cookies that tasted like broken in happiness. I held the flatbed band shot while the drummer, now Mr. Parker, to 200 fourth graders, stood in the same spot and lifted 2 sticks he keeps in his pocket. In case a day forgets its rhythm. Iris clicked. The new frame held his older face and the ghost of the old truck, and when we overlaid the two back at the center, the town's edges trembled in the nicest way, like a voice trying not to cry but happy to be heard. We bound the pairings into a slim book with a cotton string spine and put a few on the library shelf under local history, which felt small and correct. Miriam's trellis got its now, a fence with morning glories and a chair where she reads obituaries with the discipline of love. The prom doc queen stood in front of the hardware store, same grin, better boots. Gus sat by the north span on a day too windy for caps and held his photo of the proposal place while the river did its persuasive, one-sentence sermon. "Look," he said, and we did, and then we looked again, because looking well takes practice. On a Thursday that smelled like rain rehearsing, the care home receptionist called to say Gus would prefer the river to come to him. I brought the camera, the book of then/now, and a mason jar I'd filled with span water like a ridiculous talisman. He laughed when he saw it. "You can't bottle it, kid," he said, and then softened. "But you can try." We opened the window to the green, and I read him captions while he told me better ones. "That summer the base learned our names," he corrected. "The year the ice pretended it could hold the town." When he got tired, he handed me his cap. "Hold this for me until next Thursday," he said, like a loan we both knew I'd renew. The next week he was sitting up, a little paler, a lot still Gus. He tapped the camera. "Take one more of me telling you something you won't forget," he said. I did. He took a breath that belonged to Rivers. "If you stand under the span, remember to look up. The underside of things is still sky." I wrote it down the moment I got home, on a card with the washi tape Iris calls courage, and pinned it above my sink where I keep learning to wash dishes slower. Hamp's camera started walking without us. We created a humble ledger, checked boxes for permission, a column for where it went, a space for why. People began signing it out like a potluck dish. Alma brought back a photograph of Frank teaching a kid to solder with his tongue sticking out, both of them concentrating like surgeons, the radio at their elbows declaring a trumpet solo that made the air vibrate. June returned a shot of the bakery at 4 a.m., dough rows rising like a choir's inhale. The prom doc's kid photographed a porch with 3 chairs and wrote, simply, "We take turns being listened to." Sometimes a square would appear under the ledger without a name, just a picture of kindness rooted in the wild, a bicycle left with a note that said, "Ride me to your appointment, return me when you can." A bowl of plums on the library steps captioned by no one. For thirst. The anonymous Polaroidist, I realized, wasn't one person. It was what happens when a camera learns the town's hand. I avoided it as long as I could, the cardboard shoebox that belonged to me. Not literal. Those photos were lost 2 moves ago in a landlord's garbage saga. But the archive I keep inside that refuses labels. My father, coat over his shoulder in July because he never could get the weather right. Me, 12, pretending to be unbothered by any departures and fooled least by my own pretending. I took Hamp's camera to my apartment and set it on the table like a negotiation. Iris sat cross-legged on my rug, patient as a harbor. "Let me make tea," she said, which is how people ask if you want to walk toward the tender part. I stood by the window and pointed the lens at my desk wall where Miriam and Dan live in their trellis, where the kind science copy throws its soft fist, where the North Span's river keeps doing new water made of old water. I took a shot of the space where my missing pictures would have hung and watched the square fade in, not absence, exactly, but a shape ready to be filled. I wrote its caption without choking. "The wall where I practice staying." Iris put her hand on the table, palm up. I set my hand in it and let the old impulse to run sit outside for once, like a dog growing used to the leash that means home. A woman we didn't know came with a photo in an envelope and the stance of someone carrying a hot pan. She placed it on the table and said, "No names. No wall. I just wanted not to live in my house anymore." It was a party shot, people messy with youth, a laugh with teeth. The man in the corner had the hard glitter eyes of someone who had been bad at kindness, and good at taking. We can keep it in the quiet box, Rowan said, opening the drawer we'd cleared after the privacy lesson. Inside, sealed envelopes, stories we agreed to hold without showing. The woman nodded, relief arriving like a chair. Thank you for being a place for this, she said, and I understood another verb we needed on our sign, shelter. That night, I labeled the box with a little painted anemone Iris had left from a sunrise series. For the things that still have weather, I wrote. For the skies not yet ready to be looked at. Alma added a cinnamon stick because she believes in scent as healing. The box hummed quietly on the shelf. Not every square has to glow. Some can rest. Lantern evening came around again and brought a cousin, day of returning. We spread quilts on the grass and strung more lights than an electrician would recommend, and the town arrived holding offerings, duplicates, landscapes, recipes written on backs of photos because paper was close. The post office brought out a rolling cart draped in bunting and a guest book with only one line on each page, "Tell us who you saw today." The niece stood by Hamp's frame and told stories from his letters we had never heard, about the time he learned to fry eggs from a short-order cook in Portland who taught him patience with the flap, about his rule that every route deserves a song. People queued to take a turn with the camera. A kid photographed his grandmother's knees because they've been places. Someone caught two neighbors exchanging a toolbox and a hug. Detaped the news squares along the fence until the yard looked like a film strip pretending to be wind chimes. When the jazz station declared 10 o'clock, Frank held the radio high so even the latecomers could hear the minute arrive together. After we swept the grass and folded the quilts, and found 3 clothespins in the same pocket, the center exhaled. The borrowed light wall glowed with a little fatigue and a lot of work well done. I loaded one last pack in the camera and pointed it at our tired faces. A soft, wide group portrait, flower on June's sleeve, solder flecks on Frank's wrist, Iris with the washi tape looped around 2 fingers like a ring, Rowan looking like someone who keeps choosing the long version of Help. I pressed and waited and then wrote the simplest caption I've ever meant. Us. We taped it low where kids could see it without being told. I locked up and walked the long way home, past Cedar's staked memory, under the north span like I'd been told. Eyes up at the underside, the steel and shadows still sky, the river carrying its whole history without needing to narrate. On my desk, beside the picture of the wall where I practiced staying, I sealed an envelope addressed to the future, open when someone forgets. Inside I put a copy of Us, and a note that reads, "This is what returning looks like." I slid it on the shelf near the quiet box and felt the room settle, the way a town does when it knows where its stories sleep. Outside, the night kept its watch with the easy confidence of a place that trusts morning to remember the way back. Thursday came in with a polite wind, the kind that turns flags into lowercase letters. I brought Gus's cap and a pack of cards because he liked to shuffle even when we didn't play. The receptionist met me at the door with that measured kindness people learn when they work where bodies take their time. "He's sleeping," she said, and I knew the shape of sleep she meant. I sat by his window anyway. The river couldn't make the trip today, so I read him the captions from the then/now book, Miriam's Morning Glories, the drummer's sticks, the prom docks, the cedar lot with the ribbon that asks winter to be gentle. I left his cap on the chair back and my palm on the blanket for a minute. When I stood, I told the room what he'd told me, that the underside of things is still sky, and I let the sentence hang there until even the air agreed. We made the river come to him another way. On Saturday, we took a small basket of stones to the north span, each one with a word and marker: Monday, ring, soup, patience, stay. We said nothing ceremonial. We are not a town that asks language to dress up. But we placed the stones under the lip of the bridge and listened to the water carry their weight like it was exactly the right size. I took Hamp's camera out and aimed it at the space where Gus always stood and pressed the shutter. The square slid into my palm and developed an absence so full it felt like company. I wrote the caption there by the railing, kneeling for the board. Gus's place, with the river doing what it promised. We pinned a copy to the borrowed light wall and mailed the original to his niece with a note that said we would take good care of his Thursdays. Back at the center, Dee drew a banner for the wall in block letters, undersides outlined like bridges. The underside is still sky. People touch the paper as they passed, that unconscious benediction we give to things that explain us. June tucked a biscuit behind the quiet box because grief likes a snack, and Alma polished the radio's dial until the 10 o'clock jazz announced the minute like it was a soft porch light turning on. The anonymous Polaroids kept appearing, which by now meant the town had learned the trick of noticing and was teaching it to itself. One morning a square waited under the ledger, 2 hands knotting a tie on a kid whose face was too serious for the occasion, captioned, "We practiced until it looked like we always knew how." Another showed the cedar lot on a rainy day, ribbon darkened and faithful. The back said only, "We bring umbrellas now." We added a little index by the wall, borrowed light guide, so folks could find the picture that would tell them the truth they needed. C. Trying again, C. After, but okay, C. First day, third chances. Miriam's trellis threw shade the size of a room. She sent me home with a duplicate of Dan at the grill where he looked like he'd just been told a joke he was planning to steal. The prom docs queen put her then / now in the hardware store window with a sign that said, "Bring us your wobbly shelves and your wobbly days." The post office framed Hamp's dedication next to a little vase of clover, and people started tucking tiny notes behind the mat. Today's weather, the name of a dog that learned sit, the street where the peonies started. A postcard arrived from the niece, blue stamp, foreign handwriting, addressed simply to the people who kept my uncle busy. On the back, a picture of a train window and the sentence, "Returning is a language I didn't know I spoke until your town taught me the words." Work found its place in the new map without banging elbows. I wrote the kind of catalog lines that trust kitchens to be classrooms. "This bowl is for peaches, but also forgiveness." My manager stopped asking for more adjectives and started asking about lantern evening. At night, the borrowed light wall held the day like a careful shelf, and I stood there sometimes after lockup, counting captions the way some people count prayers. The shoebox found its way back to a shelf at the library. The same shelf where I'd left the note for next time, the cardboard a little softer at the corners, the lid more willing to be opened. I signed out Hamp's camera to change its batteries and stood a minute longer than necessary looking at us, taped low for the kids and for the days when adults forget to bend. Morning came through the high windows in that honeyed way that makes dusk look like it rehearsed, and the wall glowed with the ordinary courage of faces doing small verbs: hand over, receive, mend, carry, forgive, return. I walked to Cedar with a fresh copy of the house photo, and retied the ribbon the way winter likes its knots. A woman pushing a stroller paused and read the caption out loud. We were here, and answered it without meaning to. We are. At the north span, I touched the railing and read the minute by the jazz station's certainty. I looked up, because Gus was right and because the underside had its own changing light, and I practiced remembering that even the parts of a day that don't face the sun belong to the sky. Back at the center, Rowan found me by the scanner with a new stack of duplicates in his hands. We could close the loop, he said, smiling. Or we can keep the door just a little open. We left it open, because that's what returning wants, a path that doesn't end so much as relax. I took one last photograph of the borrowed light wall at golden hour, wrote its caption slowly, and taped it beside the first. The room where return things keep learning how to live. Then I locked up, the click small and right, and walked home by the route that passes every place a picture taught me to notice, carrying the quiet certainty that the town and I had traded languages and both of us could speak a little more clearly now. The night held its breath, and then, as it always does, remembered how to let the morning back in.